Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Happy October. It is Tuesday, October 1st, 2019. Time for yet another show. We missed the live show yesterday, but we did provide you with a taped update. It was sort of an update. I think we were still pretty much up to date, but so much has happened now, it's just crazy out there. Of course, we're going to bring in Greg Dworkin for a special edition, because unfortunately, we'll be caught off the air again tomorrow. Not the Jewish holidays this time, just some personal business. But, yeah, bad timing. What can I tell you? And I think it's going to cost us Joan McCarter as well. I don't think she's going to be available to come in later in the week, things being what they are. But we'll do our best to try and catch up with things. I don't think it's any longer possible, actually, to catch up. We'll just have to discuss whatever is live and happening at the moment. And we can tell you what's live and happening at the moment. Daily Co's Radio is live. Now, this is when it's happening. It's day 2 of Civil War II. Bill tells us all the way up in Portland, Maine. And you know how they are in Maine about the Civil War. And Kagro X is prepared to forge ahead with a full canteen, a slab of salted pork. That was the best thing about the first Civil War, if you ask me. Dry socks. Okay. And the business end of a bayonet. Well, that's the best kind of bayonet. All right, you best give them wide berth. It's true. I'm not certain that I have this bayonet locked on quite yet. And if I swing this thing around, there's no telling how far it may fly. Okay, we're ready to roll. President, of course, calling for, well, at least hinting that once again, this is at least, I don't know, the 4th or 5th time that we've had a rash of these sorts of suggestions that there'll be civil war if we do our civic duty and get rid of this idiot president. Lots to catch up on in terms of who is in the United States and who is traversing the globe looking for new partners in corruption to try and make up some dirt about Biden. I think it looks like everyone is closing on Italy as the site for this next big conclave. I think I've read that in the past couple of days and in a few days going forward, I think Pompeo is in Italy, not the Pompey. Pompeo is, and Pompeo might be in Italy as well. But our Secretary of State, supposedly, Pompeo is there, and he's brought Sebastian Gorka with him, which is just, the biggest tell in the world. But weren't Jared and Ivanka in Rome? I think they're all in Rome, too. They were in Rome a few days ago. I don't know if they're still there. I think they were there for a friend's wedding. Wendy Deng was there with them, the totally not a Chinese spy ex-wife of Rupert Murdoch. Steve Bannon has been hanging out in Italy at that monastery he rented out. Although I thought I saw that deal had blown up, so I'm not positive of that. I think Barr was there recently, although I think he's back here now. It's just been not only a constant parade around the world looking for partners in corruption, but just high-level so-called Trump administration folks parading in and out and making their way wherever they're going via Italy. I guess we'll find out later at some point, maybe during the impeachment trial, what that was all about. What else can we catch up on? I guess LOLs to all the idiots who listened to the Federalist the other day. That one guy at the Federalist, Sean Davis, who's just a chronic problem. And I don't know exactly what title he holds there, but he may well be the editor, for all I know, of the Federalist. And he put out a report the other day, I think based on, somebody actually traced the provenance of it, but one or another of the right-wing lunatic bloggers out there decided that he had stumbled upon evidence that the rules for whistleblower complaints were changed just days before the filing of this whistleblower complaint in order to allow for complaints to be filed on second or third hand knowledge. As you might have imagined and as you may have read by now, that is not true. Someone who actually knows how these things work, tracked it down, but that didn't do enough to end this whole thing, because apparently the Inspector General had to come out and put out his own report. Sean Davis has since showed up on cable news network to say, aha, the Inspector General totally confirms my report. He's a very weird guy. No one knows who funds the Federalist. Another great mystery out there that we hope unravels along with the Trump presidency. So, all right, let's get to it. Greg Dworkin, good morning. How are you? Tuesday again. Another weird Tuesday for you, but thanks for coming by.
Well, that's just the way the schedule works. But I will tell you, one of the things that Sean Davis has helpfully done is just proven he's a liar. I mean,
Yes.
You could have just looked at it and said, gee, he's just misinterpreting things. But after the official report, they came out and said, we've seen this coming around and it's simply not true. None of it.
Yes.
And then he goes on and says, okay, I've been vindicated. I mean, Now you know he's lying.
Yeah.
So you can just dismiss anything he ever says as if you ever paid attention.
Yeah.
But, there's a difference between being a liar and a proven liar.
Yes. The mistake was easy to make, as I read through the explainers. As
Billy Martin used to say.
Yeah.
About George Steinbrenner.
It's pretty amazing. Sean Davis, by the way, I never knew who he was. He, though, came to my attention. He was the most vocal critic and had such a great time insisting to everyone in the right-wing lunosphere that the admittedly fantastic but procedurally sound discussion I had of how between the last Congress and this new one, or the previous Congress rather, Democrats in the Senate might have been able to install Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court. That was admittedly something that they were never going to do, but I guess you now know.
Feasible.
Yes, but he insisted, of course, that was a total misunderstanding of everything that there was in the world, and now you're seeing Sean Davis never really understood anything there was in the world. What do you know?
Well,
and
that's
he was
the
a
thing.
huge liar.
He probably understood everything you were saying, and he's a liar. So that's the way I would reinterpret that, and
Womp womp.
With the new facts that we have at our disposal here.
Oh, Wells, that's not really news. There's other things involving presidents and everything that we can talk about.
Yeah, Dan Dresner had a really nice summary. I'm going to try to summarize a lot of the stuff that's happened between when we were on the air, you and I, last and now. Yes. I mean, it's only been about 5 days, but Dresner said, look, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced a formal impeachment inquiry. That was only a week ago.
Yes.
Right? The White House released a memorandum of the incriminating conversation between Trump and Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky.
Yes.
Often spelled with 2 Y's at the end, but in this case just one. The whistleblower complaint was also released. And we read it on the air on Wednesday. Trump's acting director of national intelligence testified before Congress that he thought the whistleblower had acted appropriately and found the report to be credible.
Yes.
That was last Thursday. So that happened after we spoke. I was back on Friday, so we did it again. Rudy Giuliani tied U.S. Special Envoy Kurt Volker to his efforts to gin up dirt on the Bidens, forcing Volker's resignation.
Yes, glad we got that.
The Post's Shane Harris, Josh Dawsey, and Ellen Nakashima reported that President Trump told 2 senior Russian officials in a 2017 Oval Office meeting that he was unconcerned about Moscow's interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election because the U.S. did the same in other countries. I think that was Friday afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then in between the time Dresner started writing this list and now, stories broke about the extent to which both Attorney General William Barr and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo are involved in the mess. And then the House Intelligence Committee subpoenaed Pompeo, Volker, and Giuliani, among others, telling them if they didn't comply, that would be grounds for another article of impeachment for obstruction.
Yes. And
so he adds, even by Trump's standards, that's been an insane week.
Yeah. That is a lot. That's a good summary.
It's a good summary, but the thing about the article is that it was really meant to show why is this Trump list of scandals associated with Ukraine, because this is all Ukraine stuff, different from all the previous Trump scandals. Why is Ukrainian one that different? And he posits 5, and I'll give you a 6th.
That sounded like you said Ukrainian one, which is kind of a funny pun.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, then credit for that funny pun.
Well, not from me. I saw it online, but I think it's the best description of the scandal. I refuse to use gate.
Oh, no.
So Ukrainian one fits to me. This is a presidential scandal. So whatever happened in the White House. Again, one reason why it's so different than the Mueller thing and Russians. 2, Trump's staffers are making everything worse and not better. And you could see that simply by trying to follow them online. I mean, here's one example. As you pointed out, I think you were the first one that certainly I saw to remind everybody that when Kevin McCarthy made those remarks about Dana Rohrabacher and Donald Trump being on the Russian payroll, it in fact was at a GOP conference to discuss Ukraine and to try to emphasize the fact that fighting corruption was a good thing.
Right.
In other words, in support of Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much.
So McCarthy's on TV, and he's asked about on the Sunday shows. So what about this transcript, which is not a transcript, but just notes of this conversation? Yeah, Caitlin Collins is summarizing this. McCarthy's asked about when Trump said, "I would like you to do us a favor, though." McCarthy says, "You just added another word," meaning the word "though."
Yeah.
And Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes says, "No, it's in the transcript."
Yeah,
McCarthy said, "What?" He said, "I'd like you to do a favor, though." And Scott Pelley says, "Yeah, it's in the transcript."
Hello.
So obviously McCarthy hadn't read it, and he hadn't been prepped right, and he looked like a fool. And that only summarized all of the different Trump surrogates who were on the Sunday morning show, each one doing worse than the other.
Yeah.
Whether you were talking about who was on, Stephen Miller was on,
yeah, right.
Hugh Hewitt was on, each one that went, including McCarthy, just look where Rudy, of course, was on.
Yeah.
And everybody just did such a poor job emphasizing the point that the Trump staffers are making everything look worse and not better. Point number 3 here is that Trump himself is making everything worse. Okay. And Trump says, only I can defend myself. Only I can be my own best strategist. So he's on Twitter making a fool of himself and trying to retweet people suggesting a Civil War-like situation. None of us can really interpret what that means, but the Oath Keepers did and said, we're ready. Hopefully they'll have a war with the Proud Boys just to prove it. I don't know.
Sure. Go for it.
Hopefully not. I mean, I don't want anybody actually hurt, but it's just a little scary. Number 4, the White House talking points stink, and we'll get to that in a minute for my point number 6.
Okay.
But Jake Tapper filleted?
Oh, okay.
Jim Jordan.
He did something.
I don't know if you saw that one, but that was great. Jordan starts spewing all of these ridiculous talking points about, no, it's about Joe Biden. Joe Biden this, Joe Biden that. Joe Biden did this in Ukraine. Joe Biden did that in Ukraine. And Tapper said to him, well, that's not true. That's not true. This is not true. And by the way, it's pretty remarkable that you are just throwing out all of these unsubstantiated allegations given the fact of what people have said about you in the Ohio State sex scandal.
Yes.
And Jordan just shut up because he had nothing to say after that.
Yeah.
It was pretty remarkable.
Well, now you know what you can use against him.
So Tapper got Jordan. Chris Wallace vivisected Stephen Miller. Scott Pelley pantsed Kevin McCarthy.
Miller's alive.
Rudy Giuliani clowned himself multiple times. And the reasons for this are unsurprising, Dresner writes, as White House talking points can't obscure Trump's abuse of power. Again, none of them are defending what he did. They're only doing the Sean Davis thing of, oh, well, it was hearsay and some form was changed and therefore that proves everything. They're arguing tactics and procedure and ignoring the actual case. So the White House talking points do stink, and that's because Trump wrote them.
Yep.
And then number 5, previous Democratic reticence gives this more meaning. This is the genius that was unplanned by Nancy Pelosi saying, I don't want to do this.
Yes.
I don't want to do this. I have to do this in sorrow rather than anger. That's the talking point for all the Democrats. In fact, it's true, which makes it a really good talking point as opposed to the other. And it makes them look serious and sober.
In effect, yes.
Right? Getting impeached is something, and given the evidence that everybody has, it sure seems like it's going to happen. Now, I would add a 6th thing to that. I was just throwing around this morning just because I wanted to try to put it all in one places. And that is a one-sentence scandal.
Okay.
And the point of that is something that Doris Kearns Goodwin mentioned today on Morning Joe, which I think is absolutely true. And that is that you can summarize Ukraine so much easier than you can Russia and the Mueller probe. And the reason that that's so vital and important is because if you can summarize it, you get to talk about it with your friends, and that's how narratives spread.
Okay.
For example, Chris Hayes said basically what's happening here is the president putting the full force of the United States in its foreign policy and the resources of the Department of Justice toward validating a bunch of RT InfoWars nonsense.
Yes.
Nancy Pelosi said, well, Attorney General Barr has gone rogue.
Yeah, I wasn't
right?
sure what
Richard
you meant.
Engel said, a former Ukrainian lawmaker deeply familiar with the Giuliani dirt-digging campaign told me Trump's phone call to the Ukrainian president asking for an investigation into the Bidens while withholding vital military aid was pressure, blackmail, and quid pro quo.
Those are 3 words that they said it wasn't.
Right?
Quid pro quo
And of
is
course,
the
Speaker
itself, I
Pelosi
guess.
said it's not part of his job to use taxpayer money to shake down other countries for the benefit of his campaign. That's a one-sentence summary.
True. Though she's gone
And
twice
here's a
now.
one-sentence summary from no other than the whistleblower. In the course of my official duties, I've received information from multiple U.S. government officials that the President of the United States is using the power of his office to solicit interference from a foreign country in the 2020 U.S. election. If you can summarize it that easily, you can explain it and discuss it with your friends.
Yes. Although that was
Right?
Russia, too. Seems like you should
So
be able to
it's
say
got
that.
everything.
Yeah,
And
okay.
the fact that you can do that is why this is so different. Of course, you can add all the other stuff. It's about 2020, and it's not about 2016. It's about the future and not the past. It's about what the president did, not what the president received. It's about the fact that it happened in the Oval Office rather than when he was a candidate, including the Stormy Daniels stuff and the Access Hollywood stuff and a whole bunch of things that you can dismiss as, well, that was then, but once he's president, what has he done? Well, he did this as president. So for all of those reasons, it's really different. It's sticking. It's got legs. And we got polling to prove it. And, of course, that's going to be my next topic of discussion. So
Okay.
how does that strike you?
That very
Bring you up to date?
sharply. And yeah, right. Straight across the knuckles. I felt it.
Well, that's a
It
good
strikes
thing.
me right there. Okay. Pretty good summary of the number of things that, the number of crazy things that happened. We should move on, I guess, to the next portion of the segment. There's a ton more that's still developing. The purpose of the second half of the show will be to try to plant those seeds so that when those stories break, you say, I heard about that. I knew it.
Fantastic. So
Okay.
what do we got? We got some evidence of how this is all playing with some caveats.
Okay.
All right. So impeachment inquiry polling roundup.
Yes.
And there's been about 8 or 9 polls, maybe as many as 10 polls since all of this happened. Our own civics poll at Daily Kos
Yeah.
shows support impeachment 48, oppose impeachment 46, and interestingly enough, without much change in job approval.
Okay. I
Right.
never had much, but yes.
Ipsos, 45 support, 43 oppose. CNN, which is of note, 48 support, 46 oppose. CNN is one of 3 or 4 polls that aren't just asking about impeachment inquiry.
Yes.
They're asking about impeachment and removal.
That's nice.
Right?
And they got the same number.
48 impeach and remove. And again, this is at the start when we're just ramping up. Quinnipiac poll came out, 47-47. Now, the Quinnipiac poll is of note because they had a previous poll that was 37-57. So you had a 20-point swing there. And that's pretty interesting. And the Q poll also is support impeachment and removal. So half the country's almost there to remove before we even get started. Now, just on impeach inquiry, CBS 55-45, Harris X 47-42, notable because it's Scott Rasmussen and not a very good pollster, but Republican leading. An outfit called ALG 50-44, also for impeachment and removal, as is YouGov HuffPost 50-43. Marist is 49-48, and Morning Consult is 43-43. And when you drill down and ask some of the important questions, that go along with just impeach yes or no. This one is Ipsos. Which comes closer to your view, asking registered voters? Trump is trying to smear Biden ahead of the 2020 elections, 46. Biden is trying to cover up a scandal that could hurt him in 2020, 28. So that tells you that, yeah, the Fox News crew is hearing the Biden stuff, but the general public is hearing the Trump stuff with problems. And that's actually far more important.
Okay, you must have said something was serious.
Yeah, serious. And Siri wanted to answer. I didn't quite catch that, she said.
Right, here's something serious. Excuse me, I have something to say on that. Your computer, shut up.
Now, independents say Trump is trying to smear Biden 42-17.
Okay.
And I will contend with all of these polls that the first thing you should look at is the top line and then go and look and see what the independents are doing. It'll give you an idea what's working, what's not working. Now, there's another concept here. Remember that of all the different defenses that Trump is doing, perhaps the most pure and in character isn't the Sean Davis lies.
Okay.
Right? It's hearsay, so it doesn't count.
Oh, yes.
That's not going to fly.
All right.
Because that just is a process thing, and you're dancing around the actual. That's the same thing as Devin Nunes saying, Mr. Director of National Intelligence, you have these whistleblower complaints you're here to talk to us about. How did they leak?
Yes, right.
Who cares? What are the complaints? What's the substance of the charge? Well, that's not important. What's important is how did you hear about it? How did we hear about it? We have to do something about that.
Yes.
All right. That's been his thing ever since, we knew him to be in Congress. It's dumb and it doesn't fly. And another one, of course, is the pure complaint that Trump will go to if he hasn't already is, you're damn right I called that code red. You need me on that wall. Right. I did it. So what? And it's going to come down to that because that's irrefutable.
Yes, well,
yeah, he did do it, and yes, so what? Prove to me it's a problem. Okay, so this one from Ipsos is interesting in that regard. Do you agree that elected officials who use a foreign government to attack a political rival should be removed from office? That's really the core of this, right?
Yeah, so that's a hell of a question, really, actually.
Strongly somewhat agree 69, strongly somewhat disagree 19. If you despair that the Trump base is too big and you wish it were smaller, it is smaller.
I guess so.
It's 19%.
All right.
19% say, I don't care, it's a cult, whatever he does is fine with me. That's not a big number, actually. Yes, it's bigger than we would like to see. But overall, it's really not a big number. I wouldn't mind an election result 69-16. I really would not.
True. And actually, I mean, that's about the numbers that I would have thought you would see for a straight-up questioning. Literally, do you feel like there's literally nothing Trump can do that would turn you against him? That you would get about 19%? This is a... I mean, I guess there's still room here.
The strongly somewhat agree number that elected officials who use a foreign government to attack a political rival should be removed from office. And by the way, that's a great one-sentence summary.
Yeah. It's a very aggressive one.
The 69% who strongly or somewhat agree is pretty much the same number as people who really don't like Trump.
Yes.
They ask that question.
A little higher.
Well, personally, do you like him? No, actually, most of us really don't like him.
Yeah. Well, that shouldn't be surprising. But it's a very aggressive set of questions.
Well, and so they're trying to get to the heart of, like, how do people really feel?
Okay.
Now, among Republicans, that question, do you agree that somebody who did this should be removed? Republicans strongly or somewhat agree 46, strongly or somewhat disagree 33.
Yeah.
That's among Republicans.
Yeah. And I mean,
right? Yeah. And so I'm saying to you, as I've always said to you, the time is not yet right. But everybody who says Republicans in office will never change, they'll always do this, they're always like this, they're always going to support him. No. Because the Republican base actually finds this to be a problem. They don't think it's proven. That's a different story.
True.
But if you said, no, we have proof that you would accept, what would you do with that information? They will turn on him.
Well, I would like to see that. Not that I would let them back into civic life, but
right,
do a little reconstruction on them.
And remember, folks, impeachment is a process. It starts with an inquiry, but once it gets to the Senate and it's up for trial, one of the things the Senate can do is bar people who are being impeached and convicted from serving again.
Yes, and would be a
About the
wise
only
choice.
penalty they have there, really.
Yeah, we need that. We've let a number of recidivists back into government over and over again in previous Republican administrations.
Right. Now,
We
this
need
is
a
from Quinnipiac.
de-Ba'athification
Do you
of
think
our
that President
country,
Trump believes he is above the law or not?
Oh, yes.
Yes,
I believe that.
56% agree he thinks he's above the law.
Oh, no
42% say no. So they're not convinced yet. Do you believe President Trump abuses the power of his office? 54% say yes, 43% say no. That's about his standing with what do you think of his job approval?
Okay.
So if you can prove that he abused his office, then those numbers will change.
All right, we should get to it.
Right. And then finally, the CBS poll, which came out on Sunday, 55% for an inquiry and 45% against, was interesting because if you look into Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, 77% of Republicans disapprove with an inquiry, but 23% approve. 23% is a pretty high number for Republicans approving of an inquiry.
Yeah. I mean,
And
if we
that
got
gives
those
people in
votes.
Congress like Adam Kinzinger and perhaps Hamadai in Nevada, at least the currency to say, well, I really disapprove of some things about this, and maybe I might even back an inquiry. It remains to be seen. Democrats approve of an inquiry 87-13. That 13 will change, and it's pretty split with Indies, 49-51. So there's work to be done, but ground to be gained.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, if that was reflected in the Senate Republican conference, if we got 23% of the Republicans there, that would be enough to make a thing happen.
Yep.
All right, hang on. We'll be right back for more things to happen. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin is still with us, still working hard to round up the sheer volume of stories. Can't get to everything, but there are some important points. And,
let's do this one real quick because
Okay.
I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on it, but I just found it fascinating.
All right.
The Trump campaign is spending millions right now, as we
Several.
speak, to push counter-impeachment messaging. They're dropping more than $1 million on Facebook last week as House Democrats moved forward with the inquiry. So they're doing their campaign stuff, pushing out to their fake news sites their point of view. According to the polls, it's not working.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's probably because it just struck me that nothing will happen because of the deadlocks that we have at places like the FEC, but the FEC ought to have ought to set some time aside to think about whether it's improper for the campaign to be spending on a governmental procedure like this.
So it's pretty weird. Now, David Frum writes in The Atlantic, Bill Clinton had a strategy. Trump is doing the opposite.
The opposite of
what
having
Clinton
a
did.
strategy? Oh, okay, I see.
Right?
All right.
Clinton had a war room. You know the
Yes.
famous Carville, it's the economy, stupid. But Carville did another thing, which is not quite as famous, but equally effective in a different field. And that is when Bill Clinton was under the impeachment cloud,
Yes.
Carville had a dictum, not easily summarized in like a couple of words, but basically it could have been shut up, stupid. The idea was Clinton and nobody around Clinton was permitted to talk about impeachment.
I see.
Especially Bill Clinton was not allowed to talk about impeachment.
Mm-hmm.
Clinton was, I'm doing this, I'm doing my job, I'm going to work today, here's what I'm doing, this is my schedule. No impeachment whatsoever. His surrogates were out there fighting tooth and nail, getting down in the mud, whatever. But he himself was supposed to be walled off from that. He was just doing his job. So two aspects missing from Trump's approach to this is the idea that there was a war room because Trump is just doing this from the seat of his pants the way he always does. And at the same time, he's doing the opposite of claiming that I don't really care about this impeachment stuff. That's partisan nonsense. I'm simply doing my job and delivering the kind of America that people want. He's not doing that at all. He's obsessed with it. He tweets about it constantly. He's tweeting about it this morning. He had 80, 70, huge number of tweets about it, insulting people left and right, doing the Trump thing. But while he thinks that's effective communication because he can reach his people directly, at least for the ones that aren't being paid by fake Russian ads and troll bots, the thing is that all he's doing is convincing people he's obsessed with it and that he's not governing. And so if you're one of those people on the fence saying, I wish he wouldn't tweet, I wish he would, I wish he hadn't done that, or I don't really totally accept that it's okay to spend taxpayer money trying to strong arm a foreign government into collecting bogus stories on a political rival.
Right. Several.
And all he does is remind you that that's exactly what happened, and it's the most important thing in the world to him, and nothing else is. That's bad.
That's true. There was a point there where everybody thought that maybe the strongest argument against him was, I wish he'd shut up and stop tweeting.
Right. Well, that ain't going to happen. So we have that. And I think that was, an important part of all of this. Three things that from maybe 3 or 4 articles here that I think were important. This one is from John Harwood.
All right.
GOP defenses for Trump's Ukraine call quickly collapse under scrutiny. We were talking about the Sean Davis nonsense. Mm-hmm. But it was hearsay. House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy notes the whistleblower wasn't on the call, but
Pompeo was.
Hearsay, Senator Lindsey Graham insists, can't be a basis for impeachment, but both observations are irrelevant in the partial transcript of the call released. Trump's own words affirm the whistleblower's account, direct evidence, not hearsay. Former Jeff Flake, Former GOP Senator Jeff Flake told Harwood if they thought it would be exculpatory, they miscalculated badly.
Yes, that's effed up, is short version.
Here's another version of a defense. Biased whistleblower. The president says the still unidentified whistleblower harbors known bias against him. If the whistleblower's information is accurate, motivation doesn't matter. Tom Bossert, his former Homeland Security advisor, described himself as deeply disturbed by the president's behavior. So that's not going to fly. Media distortion. That's where Kevin McCarthy claimed 60 Minutes was distorting the record when, in fact, he himself is the one who hadn't read it. So that was pretty funny. Steve Scalise insisted the favor Trump sought was an investigation into the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike and had nothing to do with Biden. So now you're just flat out lying. I mean, and it falls apart because if you read the transcript, it's clear that that's not the case, and the whistleblower complaint was based on the fact that it's not the case. Yeah, and that will be adjudicated.
And he did mention CrowdStrike, but that is not exculpatory.
Well, that was a second
in the sense that
impeachable offense.
Right. Yes. Right.
Don't confuse your impeachable offenses, Steve Scalise. Right. Biden interfered, except the record shows that he didn't. And there's some very, very nice pieces, one by Adam Entis in Columbia Journalism Review, one by James Risen. I wrote about the Bidens in Ukraine years ago. Then the right-wing spin machine turned the story upside down. Nice. The timeline doesn't fit. Risen makes it very clear that Britain in particular was starting to impound funds from the crooked folks in Ukraine. And they, among many other international entities, were pushing Biden to go in, or at least the U.S. with Biden as spokesperson, to get rid of this corrupt prosecutor who wasn't prosecuting anything. And he was gone before a lot of the stuff that they say Joe Biden did wrong, in fact, was not an issue because the timeline doesn't match up. But it's all laid out in these stories that it's just nonsense. Now, the no quid pro quo is another argument. First of all, you don't need one. Mimi Roca, calling Trump's purpose 100% clear, notes that even mobsters don't make extortion demands explicit. Writing in the Washington Post, Jeff Flake said the partial transcript removed all ambiguity about the president's intent. Okay. Whistleblower's account seems convincing, concludes Corey Shake, a former national security aide to President George W. Bush, that the president was using our country's foreign policy to blackmail a foreign country.
Yes.
And, the withholding of the aid to Ukraine is another issue. Increasingly frenetic on Twitter, Trump now warns that his impeachment could provoke civil war. At a minimum, the Ukraine revelations have amplified conflict within his own party. Again, Adam Kinzinger of Illinois condemned Trump's warning of civil war as beyond repugnant. GOP Representative Mike Turner criticized the Ukraine call as not okay. Mitt Romney found it deeply troubling. Again, these little minor things, okay, well, what are you going to do about it? Gloss over the fact that for them to say it at all is a big deal in the current Republican Party. All right? So imagine a truly authoritarian party. You don't have to invoke Hitler, but you're allowed because Mike Godwin said you could.
Okay.
But, imagine an authoritarian party with somebody speaking up and saying, I found some of your remarks repugnant.
Oh. Yeah.
That's not usually how it goes. And in this particular party, I'm not saying that this is the Nazi party, but I am saying that the pressure to toe the line is pretty high. Yes. Because once the dam breaks, we've seen what happened. We had a whole bunch of dam breaking. Country was flooded last week with
the whole dam
breaks in those dams. So once people start saying it, they're already telling you behind the scenes, I don't want to go on record, but I'm really upset by this and I hate Trump. And now some people are going on record and saying, I'm really upset by this. I won't tell you I hate Trump, but, it's just I'm really bothered by this. That's a tip of the iceberg and not at all typical. So it's a bigger deal than it seems.
Okay, we'll take it. I mean, we have to. It's there.
The fissures are growing, former GOP Representative Carlos Corbello told me. I've heard from members who are at the end of the rope. They just feel trapped. You'll hear a lot of, everybody, you have the soccer mom some year. And other years, you talk about, various cliches that just drive you crazy. The cliche that you're going to start to hear this week is exit ramp.
Okay.
The Republicans don't have an exit ramp. How are they going to get out of their blind support for Trump knowing that it's all going to collapse in the end and that he is going to be impeached and this stuff's all going to come out? How do they distance themselves from blind support to make it sound like, I knew all along that I hated him. I couldn't tell you, but I was working behind the scenes to make everything right.
Yes.
So they have to build exit ramps for themselves, and that's what they're going to be doing verbally for the next week or two.
Okay. Build Infrastructure Week.
It's Infrastructure Week, exactly.
They're just building exit ramps. No highway.
That's a brilliant observation, which I'm going to steal and put on Twitter.
Excellent. Okay, why don't we take that? And all right, I'm influencing Twitter even without being on it.
Right. So Michelle Goldberg just comes out and says that Trump's claims about Biden aren't unsupported. They're lies. The president's accusations turn reality on its head, and the media should say so. And that's true. They should.
Yes. She did. So that's good.
That is good.
I'll take it. I don't know what else to say.
Right. And then let me just, before I finish up, the caveat is something Mark Blumenthal pointed out about these polls. There's no evidence for it, but watch for the concept that Trump supporters may be so bummed out by this that they're refusing to answer polls these days, thereby driving the polls in the direction of the Democrats. Differential non-response, as the pollsters call it. The idea is that when you're really happy about something, you're more than likely, if you got a favorite sports team and they won, you're more likely to go right to the sports section. And if they lost, maybe I'll just read that later,
I can see
but
that.
If you get a poll call from somebody and you happen to be, and you're a big Trump supporter and you're really bummed right now, you may just not answer that call. Now, how do you know? Look at the pollsters and see if who calls themselves a Democrat, who calls themselves a Republican, who calls themselves an independent. See if that has a radical shift. Party ID, self-described, does in fact change, but not radically quickly. And if you see radical quick changes in the makeup for those polls, it's a sign that maybe something like that is going on. Hasn't happened yet, but just something to watch for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, if you were theorizing on it, I suppose you could convince me either way. I would say there's merit to people saying, "Oh, I'm definitely answering this poll to tell the lying, stupid media that, but getting bummed out and saying, I don't even want to get into this. I know where this is going. Screw this. I'm not.
Yeah. Well, the politics of resentment work best when you're hyped up.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're a little deflated and a little bit depressed about the news that you're seeing, then it doesn't work quite as well. You got to catch your breath and get mad at something else.
We'll see whether that helps with the voting situation.
Yes, exactly. I would like that to be true when voting comes around as well. And, of course, it's October now, right?
Yes.
So
officially.
Next month, your Virginia is going to be up for election, right?
Yes. I'm going to keep Virginia.
Well, keep voting.
That's what I will do.
So not at the federal level, but at the state level. And it's a really important election. And it should be a close election. And we'll probably get some signs and portents and omens and entrails and such about what's going on with the electorate when we see who shows up.
Yes. Keep the entrails to a minimum.
Hopefully.
You want to give people a chance to vote.
Yes.
Before we pull out their entrails.
You would think so.
Okay.
So anyway, that's my summary for today, just trying to catch us up for where we've been. And, I think that watching the, 10 polls on impeachment, that's pretty remarkable. We've come a long way in a short time.
Yes. Well, it is. It's remarkable, in fact, even that there are, now that it's a big hot topic, I guess it's not that surprising. But honestly, 10 polls on impeachment wasn't something you could always talk about. It was rare to even get one person, one pollster bold enough to answer the question, and then they got a lot of flack. What are you pulling impeachment for? That's a dumb question.
Right. Who are you? PPP? Yeah, you're those guys that poll that, and then right. Who's more popular, Roaches or Trump? Right. That's not really serious, even though they're a serious pollster. But it's great. But even more important than the number of polls is the findings. I mean, when you've got 20-point swings in favor of impeachment and you've barely started.
Yes.
That's pretty remarkable. That means the story's getting through. That means it's short enough so that you can tell it to your friends and discuss it and feel like you have at least a sense of what's going on. And that's why, the big stories that broke about Pompeo being in on the call and proving that he's a lying liar when he said he didn't know anything about it. And at the same time, finding out that Bill Barr is going to Italy, but also that he's been in discussions with Australia and the United Kingdom, essentially trying to get dirt, not against Biden, although he'd be happy to take it if he were there, but also basically trying to refute the intelligence community about the entire dossier and narrative around the Mueller report, trying to undermine that, is just a Ukraine, which I understand is now in perspective the scandal writ large, which is that Trump is using all of the apparatus of the federal government, be it Department of State, Department of Justice, the IRS, you name it. But he's basically co-opted all of that in service to himself, to protect himself, to do things for himself and not the country. And that's another simple narrative that people can understand. And this just all feeds into it. Yes. Now, it may be that Barr didn't do anything illegal. He's allowed to go around and talk to people. As to whether it's impeachable or not, that's another story. What if he also talked to Saudi Arabia and the Russians in the same way?
Yes, that's a big if. And I think everybody suspects that he probably has.
Well, I think we should have an investigation with subpoena power.
It would be irresponsible not to have one.
And now that we know that they've been hiding phone calls, let's see some phone calls from Putin and from Mr. Bonesaw. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, Putin, already worried about it, has sent a warning shot to Trump saying, don't release our calls without our permission.
Yeah.
And you know what? What's the quid pro quo there? The or else is silent.
Right. Well, he knows how to do those things.
Yeah.
Although, honestly, if I were Putin and I didn't have anything, I would probably make the same threat just because I know, he's a sophisticated guy. He knows how things like that are taken in the United States.
Well,
And
as George Conway noted on Twitter, this is simple. Just go ahead and subpoena the State Department translator who was at the Helsinki discussion.
That needs to happen.
Because he was the only one there, and subpoena him and make him tell us under oath what happened.
Yeah. Right. Well, they ought to do that for at least two reasons that I can think of, not the least of which is that should never have been secret that way, period. And it was weird and suspicious, and I'd like to know what the hell was going on and let him talk in private to the Intelligence Committee if that's what has to happen.
Right.
Now
So there will be
there's
Intelligence Committee hearings this week. They're supposed to be on break, but they're not totally on break, so that's good. And, that's the news from Lake Wobegon right now, so let's see what happens.
Okay. That's all you can do. We'll see what happens. There's really not much more we can do.
Yeah.
It's in the hands of the investigators now.
Yeah, my position is let's see what happens. Go ahead, come at me.
I guess so. Right. Can't disagree. Even Trump agrees.
Right. Take
Excellent.
care,
Thank
and
you.
I will
Sam.
talk to you not tomorrow, but Thursday.
Yes.
Are you going to have a podcast for tomorrow? How are you going to handle tomorrow?
Don't know. I hope so. That's a question for, how does the rest of the day go, and can we organize one out? It's a hell of a time to leave without one, so I'm going to be doing my best.
Right.
But, I'm terrible, so.
Okay, I'm just letting your listeners know to look out for something tomorrow, and then we'll be back Thursday, and we'll try to summarize the week that happened between now and then.
Yes, and then Friday for all the things we missed and things that you should read about on your own over the weekend.
Right. So take care, and I'll talk to you
Thank
Thursday.
you. All right, we'll do. Thanks very much. Thanks for the extra show. We appreciate it. And I don't know where to start diving in on all of this, and I might have to just sort of do a survey of what's in Pocket and what's in the Twitter feed and go from there. Let's see. I do have, let's see, there's a couple things that Greg mentioned that he only mentioned in passing because we only had time for headlines, and I think I'll leave them that way. I think those were wise choices. I guess another hot topic before we transition into the an examination of some of the smaller bits of news from over the weekend, we'll stick to one of the larger picture stories. Politico driving, I think, this story. No, I'm sorry. Wasn't it in fact? I'm losing track of who broke which story now. Well, this is what I've got. I've got a Politico story. Whether it was theirs to break or not, I don't know. But the headline and the designation in Pocket that it is trending tells me it's an important one. Trump may have lied to Mueller, House Democrats say. Now, I think we all figured that he did, but the fact that this is now becoming an established talking point, and it's one to which even Mueller is willing to cop. Not that I'm less convinced of Mueller's power to drive a narrative here than I used to be, like before he testified and then didn't drive a narrative. I worry about it if he's got the keys. But anyway, here's the deal. It's House Democrats who have the keys. Not much better than Mueller on balance, but they're getting better. So this is an Andrew Desiderio piece in Politico. The subheader says, Dems believe the special counsel's grand jury materials could aid their Ukraine investigation, according to a court filing. This is a nice way of tying things together again. Once again, a good reminder that the Ukraine scandal and the Russia scandal are one and the same. They're tied together. That stands to reason. I know people are less insistent about separating the two now. I think gradually as time goes on, people are coming to realize that they can't really be separated. But that doesn't mean that that one approach to impeachment couldn't, in fact, be a fast-moving, tightly focused, semi-Ukraine-only focused impeachment. That can still happen. and that by itself wouldn't necessarily shut out further impeachment proceedings, depending on political. It's a nuanced, non-scientific thing. It's all feel. It's all art at that point. Could you go forward? I think a good point that many have made, including Armando, who sadly not available to us to make that point on the air these days. But that doesn't, and if you're mad with him, that doesn't necessarily preclude him from making insightful points from the outside and having them noted on the air. But I think his concern in all of this, in terms of how the impeachment is framed and against whom it moves and how quickly, and I guess more to the point, how many bites at the apple you might get. He makes a good point that there might not be political patience for more than just one solid shot on impeachment. It is possible, although you never know, and with growing sentiment in favor of impeachment, growing understanding among the public of how interconnected all of this is and how many players there are who really need to be singled out for punishment and all this, it is entirely possible that they might be able to do more than just take one shot at things. And I think that possibility opens up a little bit more if, for instance, the first shot across the bow using impeachment isn't targeted at Trump. I would say it's worth considering making the fast-moving, narrowly focused Ukraine-centric impeachment move be against Barr, or at this stage, even Pompeo, or any number of Trump administration officials, and use it as a dress rehearsal at this point and see how much clout the Ukraine-only story actually has. Remove the nerves that go along with things for Republicans to, declare themselves against Trump. It would be, I think, a little bit easier for them to put distance between themselves and Barr or Pompeo and test the waters. Anyway, I guess here's the relationship, or one of several relationships between the Russia side and the Ukraine side. Recall that Democrats were on the Judiciary Committee even before the dam broke and Nancy Pelosi was willing to announce that we were officially in impeachment mode. There was that weird, maybe like 2-week period during which the Judiciary Committee was committed to the idea that they would be telling people that they have impeachment inquiries going on, even though the Democratic caucus as a whole wasn't necessarily saying the same thing. That drove a lot of people crazy, including Abigail Spanberger, so you have to acknowledge that. But we were theorizing back at the time that what the Judiciary Committee was after was additional leverage in court in its several lawsuits against recalcitrant witnesses and in support of their subpoenas of material from various sources that, including, importantly, the redacted grand jury Rule 6E material in the Mueller report. That we had with this whole discussion about whether or not a congressional committee investigating impeachment had additional leverage with courts, or even an absolute right, in the view of some courts, to pushing aside the usual Rule 6E protections for grand jury material and getting this redacted stuff. But that only being involved only in the context of impeachment was this claim at its strongest, so they declared themselves to be in a state of impeachment investigation, which they can do, and were testing the waters. And now they have the additional leverage of saying, well, now everyone knows that even the Speaker of the House says that we're in impeachment mode. Granted that it is a set of questions about Ukraine, but there's a lot of crossover between the Ukraine story and the Russia story. And the main point is impeachment is underway. We don't know how many articles there will be, and we don't know the spectrum of charges that the articles of impeachment eventually discussed will include. So they're making the play here for using the Ukraine-leveraged declaration by Pelosi as additional arguing power for the 6E material in their cases. That's the upshot of what's going on here. There are other ties between the two, which I guess now that we're coming up on break, we'll save the reading of the article for the other side and just blurt out the other tie that I think doesn't get mentioned enough. Well, Ukraine and Russia, they're neighbors. They've been involved in one another's politics since forever. There's a blurring of the lines between the two countries. There's a significant ethnic Russian and Russian-speaking population in Ukraine. It's difficult sometimes for some of us to tell the difference between the two. They both, of course, use that, I guess, Cyrillic alphabet. They sound very similar, but they're actually different languages, etc., etc. And, of course, we have breakaway separatists fighting inside Ukraine by people who claim to be Ukrainians and who sometimes, in fact, are actually Russians, but even so are fighting for the cause of separation from Western Ukraine and distinguishing themselves either as a separate country or perhaps a lost province of Russia. The point is, Ukraine hasn't been in control of its own destiny for very long, and hasn't been for a very long time. And it's very difficult to tell among Ukrainians, are you a Ukrainian or a Russian Ukrainian? And which side are you really on here? So there's a lot of confusion. It shouldn't surprise us if we can't tell the difference between Russia and Ukraine in this area either. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Not a long break, but it gives me time to think about how we're going to make this transition. Hopefully I'll remember the thought I have in my head here, which is that we can transition after this to make the point even more strongly about the difficulty in telling the difference between actions in Ukraine taken by Ukrainians or Russian Ukrainians or Ukrainian Russians or what have you. I mean, there's a lot of confusion. Remember, of course, that the prior couple of governments in Ukraine since its independence, and you gotta kind of put that in scare quotes, from Russia, from the Russian Federation, from the old Soviet Union, etc., have been pretty close to controlled by Moscow, which is about what you would expect a panicky Moscow to do. I mean, the reason that they dominated Ukrainian politics for centuries prior is because they have always been, Russia's always been, if you've studied anything about Russia or Russian history or even just modern Soviet Russian history at any point in your life, you probably have heard about the concept. They're constantly fearful of invasion from the West, largely because they kept getting invaded from the West. And it's a real sore point for them. And post-World War II, the whole, Eastern Bloc was all about setting up client states as buffers between them and the aggressive West, so that if the West moved eastward in their direction, look, you can conquer all the Slavs, Czechs, and Poles you want. This just gives us warning before you get to the Russian motherland, and and at which point, even if you infiltrate into there, we retreat further and further back and just make you stretch out your supply lines. You all remember the history. Anyway, it has served them well, and they continue to operate on the same basis, and that's why it was so terribly disturbing to them that Ukraine had proposed to join the West, to westernize, to join the European Union if they could, to join NATO even if they could, and be a NATO state right on the border with Russia. That was a big deal and worrisome to them. And a lot of the criticism you see now of from the Trump camp of, well, all these problems are created by, say, for instance, the Obama administration because they were weak on Ukraine. They lost Ukraine, or they gave away Ukraine, or they never fought for them before. They wouldn't give them the Javelin missiles like the Trump administration is doing, except that they weren't either. But sort of blaming this current situation on Obama and Democratic weakness in their aid for Ukraine, a lot of that was dictated by the fact that thoughtful foreign policy hands wondered frequently what we don't really know what an autocrat like Putin, what his reaction is going to be to our aggressively pushing for a NATO state on his border. Westernizing Ukraine was a very touchy subject, and a lot of foreign policy hands worried we may needlessly provoke Putin here, but if we can bring this along slowly and make it a clear issue of, or at least try to frame it as an issue of self-determination, maybe even if Putin himself doesn't accept it, the rest of the civilized world will, and he'll realize that he's outnumbered and outgunned at places like the United Nations and the World Court of Public Opinion, essentially, and back off. Well, anyway, didn't seem to work very well. But as a result, they continued to stay involved in Ukrainian politics, and by which I mean murdering Ukrainian politicians who were not compliant with their wishes, and backing financially and even militarily, in other cases, politicians in Ukraine who were sympathetic with their point of view, to say it as gently as possible. And so there are still a lot of actors in Ukraine, or who can claim to be Ukrainian. Remember, of course, that one of the previous presidents of the country, when forced from office by Ukrainians themselves for being too pro-Russian, where did he make off for? He went into exile in Russia. It's pretty easy to cross over, and of course during the old Soviet days it was a simple thing for Ukrainians to, essentially relocate and pass themselves off as, well, if not Russian per se, then certainly Soviet, but to erase the distinction between themselves and Russians was a relatively simple thing to do, at least from our perspective from the outside. Who knows what the prejudices were inside the Soviet Union, but from our side, certainly not much distinction made between Russians and Ukrainians. And still, we see Ukrainians who are sympathetic to and have allegiances to Russia, more so than, or let's say Moscow more so than Kiev, at any rate, and who may be malignant actors, and that ends up fueling the confusion, or at least fueling the possibility for Trump supporters to say things like, well, it wasn't Russia that meddled in the U.S. elections in 2016. It was Ukrainians, you see. And we should be pinning it all on them. And they're the one, and they were interfering, and sometimes they frame it as saying, well, the interference in favor of Trump was Ukrainian to begin with. And sometimes they say, well, the Ukrainians did interfere, but their interference was in favor of Hillary Clinton instead. It's kind of baseless, but I guess really the point here is there are so many Ukrainians, or rather so many kinds of Ukrainians, and so many angles from which Ukrainians can approach politics, either in their own country or in others. You are going to be able to find pro-Trump Ukrainians, and you will find anti-Trump Ukrainians, and it shouldn't surprise you. So when we transition out of this story, we'll perhaps talk about what some of Trump's Ukrainian allies have been up to here in the United States. Okay, I think we've explained ourselves probably too much. Let's jump over back to the Politico article. Remember, what started this off was Trump may have lied to Mueller, House Democrats say. Dems believe the special counsel's grand jury materials could aid their Ukraine investigation, according to a court filing. Even though the original court filing was about their Russia investigation because it was about Mueller's probe, the crossover should be easy to see, if not necessarily understand. Lawyers for the House of Representatives revealed on Monday that they have reason to believe that the grand jury redactions in special counsel Robert Mueller's report show that President Donald Trump lied about his knowledge of his campaign's contacts with WikiLeaks. That's what's at the middle of all of this. The attorneys made the stunning suggestion, it's not really all that stunning to suggest that Trump lied, but when it's done in court materials, the stunning suggestion in a court filing as part of a House Judiciary Committee's bid, the committee's bid for Mueller's grand jury materials, which have remained secret by law to this point. Not only could those materials demonstrate the president's motives for obstructing the special counsel's investigation, which was an apparently important thing to the special counsel, they could also reveal that Trump was aware of his campaign's contacts with WikiLeaks, which everyone really thinks is the case. The lawyers wrote in the filing, which was in response to the Justice Department's opposition to the disclosure of the grand jury information. Remember, Trump has got the Justice Department working in his personal defense here. To back up their claim, the House's legal team, led by House General Counsel Douglas Letter, cited a passage in Mueller's report about former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort's testimony that he recalled Trump asking to be kept updated about WikiLeaks' disclosure of DNC emails. There is a grand jury redaction in that passage, the lawyers note. By the way, since we're collecting Ukraine/Russia information along the way, don't lose sight of the fact that Ukraine has always been there, not just for my reminding you of the original content of the June 2016 conversation among the Republican leadership in the House that we only found out about in May of 2017. That was a conversation about Ukraine, not about Trump being paid by Putin. That's how it became famous, but that's not what the conversation was about. And that Paul Manafort is in jail because Ukraine, even though he was put there by Mueller, who was investigating Russia. There's really no separating the two. Anyhow, so let's see, where were we? The House legal team says that Manafort testified that he recalled Trump being asked to be up to date about WikiLeaks disclosures of DNC emails, and that there's a redaction in that passage. The text redacted and any underlying evidence to which it may point are critical to the committee's investigation, the Democrats wrote, the lawyers anyway. Those materials, therefore, have direct bearing on whether the president was untruthful and further obstructed the special counsel's investigation when, in providing written responses to the special counsel's questions, he denied being aware of any communications between his campaign and WikiLeaks, they added. I mean, of course that's a lie. I love WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Why would he be saying that? The answer is he was well aware. In a text message to Politico, Jay Sekulow, Trump's personal attorney, one of several, as you know, said the suggestion that Trump lied to Mueller's investigators is, quote, absurd. Well, we'll see about that. The White House and the Justice Department did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Monday's filing also referenced the most recent scandal engulfing the Trump White House, the president's efforts to pressure Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, which caused Speaker Nancy Pelosi to formalize an impeachment inquiry. Letter, that is the general counsel for the House, and his deputies argued that Mueller's grand jury evidence could also be useful for the House's ongoing Ukraine probe. Those events may also be relevant to the House's investigation of the president's solicitation of Ukrainian interference in the 2020 election, the lawyers wrote, referencing Trump's efforts to curtail the Mueller probe. More specifically, they said Mueller's grand jury materials would further the House Intelligence Committee's investigation of Trump's alleged attempts to pressure Ukraine to prosecute individuals who testified against Manafort. I don't think we even really have discussed that to this point. Trump's alleged attempts to pressure Ukraine to prosecute individuals who testified against Manafort. Wow. The House lawyers also argued in Monday's filing that the Justice Department has no grounds to determine whether the House is engaged in an impeachment inquiry, which is the House's central claim to Mueller's grand jury files. Under the Constitution's separation of powers and the authority the Constitution vests in the House alone to structure its proceedings, that power is not DOJ's for the taking, the lawyers wrote, adding a reference to Pelosi's pronouncement last week that the House was launching an official impeachment inquiry. As we said, it is up to them. The House will tell you what it's doing. The committee will tell you what its business is and whether or not it is an impeachment inquiry. And the DOJ can't be allowed to have a role in saying, no, it's not really an impeachment inquiry because XYZ. The House is the final determinant of what it's doing. That's the argument being made here. In its previous filing, the Justice Department seized on House Democrats' lack of a consistent message on impeachment, which came amid divisions among party leaders over whether to pursue the president's removal based on Mueller's evidence that Trump sought to obstruct the investigation. Mueller did not reach an official conclusion as to whether the president obstructed justice, however, and Attorney General William Barr, along with his then-deputy Rod Rosenstein, concluded that the evidence Mueller's team assembled is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense. But in the wake of new revelations about Trump's efforts to pressure Zelensky, House Democrats have adopted a unified front in favor of an official impeachment inquiry. And I guess we'll find out whether that changes the way the court views things, although, quite frankly, the more important argument, even if it isn't the more persuasive necessarily in this case, because, the court can simply point to the fact that they now say, one and all, that there is, in fact, an impeachment inquiry going on. But if they didn't, you could still point to the constitutional argument that the executive branch doesn't get to declare what sort of investigation the legislative branch says it's conducting. All right. So, transitioning out of this, jumping back to Pocket, I know I had stories about this, and I managed on Friday, there were two additional angles that I wanted to throw at you either on that Friday or for reading over the weekend. And one was talking about Karl Volker. Was that his name? Karl? Is that right? Kurt. That's right. Kurt Volker. And we managed to sneak that one in under the wire and give you the information you needed before he resigned on Friday. But there was another pair of names, and I did mention them on the air at some point, and I don't think we ever read the story aloud. And I'm going to have to try and, I don't know whether to scroll back and try and look for the original story I meant to share with you about them, or whether having blurted out the names, I may have thrown you that article and then put it into the archive file rather than keeping it here in Pocket. But I have a new piece, or at least a newish piece, and I'm wondering, now I'm thinking about it, I'm wondering whether it's the same piece or not. But man, this is I've thrown so many things into the queue here that the time I'm spending scrolling looking for the original article is probably not gonna help. Here we are. Yes, okay, I found it. What do you know? All right, let's see. One is the BuzzFeed News piece, which I'll open up. Two unofficial U.S. operatives reporting to Trump's lawyer privately lobbied a foreign government in a bid to help the president win in 2020. Sounds enticing. Yes, this is BuzzFeed's July 22nd, 2019 report on, I think, the same two individuals. And let's see, now more recently, but not immediately in the top lines, here we are, is yet another piece. And this one, I think, comes from, remember these guys, the OCCRP? This, I think, is one of those Russian opposition party investigative sites that we've gone to before, I think, for a description of what they were calling the Trump laundromat, the money laundering operation, and the connections that it had to Russia and Ukraine, by the way. And their version of it is titled this way: Meet the Florida duo helping Giuliani investigate for Trump in Ukraine. Why don't we start then with the older piece? Although, what is the date on it? Oh, this one too is July 22nd, 2019. So they're both dated around the same time. I'm guessing then that the OCCRP piece may be the basis of the BuzzFeed piece. And maybe we'll start with the BuzzFeed piece and say it's either been explained through, or if you are a Trump supporter, whitewashed through BuzzFeed News. They take Russian information source and Americanize it so that we all believe it, which is, I'm sure, ultimately what the Q conspiracy people think is going on here, is that we're all the ones being swayed by Russian propaganda. And I guess it could all be true. And we'll all wake up and find out that we're in the Matrix in the end of all this. But since we haven't yet, we'll start with the BuzzFeed piece. The two unofficial U.S. operatives reporting to Trump's lawyer, Giuliani, privately lobbied a foreign government in a bid to help the president win in 2020. Reporting directly to Donald Trump's personal lawyer, two operators waged a brazen back-channel campaign that could thrust another foreign country to the center of the next U.S. election. That was Michael Sala, Tanya Kozyreva. How do you say that one? Kozyreva. Kozyreva. I don't know. You tell me. And Aubrey, Belford. And as I'm saying it, it occurs to me, I think there was, yes. And even there's a third article out here that, let me see what the date is on this one. Brand new. Okay, so we can definitely be brought up to date by the Miami Herald, of all places. And, they've been pretty good on the Epstein front. And this is, I guess we'll follow up the BuzzFeed read with this one. All right, so going back to July, we are reading about two unofficial envoys reporting directly to Donald Trump's personal lawyer have waged a remarkable back-channel campaign to discredit the president's rivals and undermine the special counsel's inquiry into Russian meddling in U.S. elections. In a whirlwind of private meetings, and do you remember me mentioning these names like last Friday? Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who I noted for you is sometimes referred to accidentally or possibly as an alias as Igor Furman. But Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman are the names here. They pumped hundreds of thousands of dollars into Republican campaigns and dined with the president. And they gathered repeatedly with top officials in Ukraine to set up meetings for Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, as they turned up information that could be weaponized in the 2020 presidential race. I think this is what I gave you that Friday to tease you with for what I thought was going to be Monday and now instead is Tuesday. The two men urged prosecutors to investigate allegations against Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden, and they pushed for a probe into accusations that Ukrainian officials plotted to rig the 2016 election in Hillary Clinton's favor by leaking evidence against Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign chair, in what became a cornerstone of the special counsel's inquiry. They also waged an aggressive campaign in the United States, staying at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C., and meeting with key members of Congress as they joined in a successful push that led to the removal of the ambassador to Ukraine after she angered their allies in Kiev. Again, I remind you here of the discussion we just had 20 minutes ago about the difficulty in telling when you're talking to Ukrainians. Like if you talk to these, or we talk about these guys and you say, but I thought that the Ukrainians were pro-Western and trying to Westernize, and they were angry at Putin and Putin's closeness with Trump, and they should be anti-Trump. Yes, well, the country's at civil war. There are Ukrainians that are pro-Russian and pro-Trump, and they are fighting and killing Ukrainians who are the opposite. civil war. Get it? All right. Meanwhile, the two men, both of whom have troubled financial histories, and so, by the way, which side do you think they would pick in this civil war, rose to prominence in Republican circles. And which party do you think that they would move in the United States? They rose to prominence in Republican circles, meeting with party leaders while injecting hundreds of thousands of dollars into top Republican committees and dozens of candidates' campaigns, like what we were seeing on the other side with Russia and the NRA. As they carried out their campaign, they used their proximity to the White House to tout a new business that they set up to sell natural gas in Ukraine. Again, back to the June 2015 discussion among House Republican leaders. They were astonished not only at the Russian aggression in manipulating the politics of Ukraine, but aghast that they were manipulating the oil and gas industries in Ukraine. So, as they carried out their campaign, they used their proximity to the White House to tout a new business that they had set up to sell natural gas in Ukraine, with photos posted on Facebook showing Parnas posing with President Trump in the White House and top House members on Capitol Hill. And by the way, so they had set up a new business to sell natural gas in Ukraine, right? What was the business of Burisma, on the board of which Hunter Biden sat? Energy and natural gas. So in other words, Burisma was, well, I don't know which came first, but these two clowns set up a rival to Burisma, and I'm sure that at the time it was probably pretty clear that you could battle for nominal political control of Ukraine by becoming the dominant oil and gas corporation that would make you a multi-billionaire oligarch, and you could have your way in Ukraine. And probably the Russians backed one operation, and the Western-looking Ukrainians backed another, probably Burisma. So it wouldn't be very surprising to find out that the pro-Trump forces were interested in a probing of Burisma, although it wouldn't be all that surprising to find out that Democrats in the United States likewise were interested in probing Burisma, because Ukrainians can be as corrupt as Russian Ukrainians. Anyway, carrying on here, as they carried out their campaign using the proximity to the White House to tout their new business, photos were set up with Parnas posing with President Trump and in the White House and top House members on Capitol Hill. Their work proved influential. Prosecutors in Kiev, and I believe anytime now that you say prosecutors in Kiev, you can add. Right. Prosecutors in Kiev announced in March that they would investigate the officials accused of trying to steer the election in Clinton's favor, a month after meeting with Parnas, Friedman, and Giuliani. And Trump applauded the plan in an interview with Fox News, calling the allegations big and incredible. Two really just fantastic words. He's just a genius. The next month, Attorney General William Barr announced that he had appointed a federal prosecutor to lead a probe into the origins of the Mueller investigation. Remember, this is an article from back in late July. And as a matter of fact, just so that we can put a finer point on it, July 22nd, 2019, 3 days before the call to Zelensky, is this story breaking, okay? Parnas said he expected the information that he and Friedman advanced to become an important focus of Barr's inquiry and to dominate the debate in the run-up to the 2020 election. Well, it is, just not the way you thought. It's all going to come out, he said. Something terrible happened, and we're finally going to get to the bottom of it. Well, okay. In an exclusive interview with BuzzFeed News at the Trump International Hotel, the 47-year-old former stockbroker, like Felix Sater, right? The former stockbroker insisted that he and Friedman were not paid, like everybody else, for acting as intermediaries between Ukrainian officials and Giuliani. All we were doing was passing along information, he said. Information was coming to us. Either I bury it or I pass it on. I felt it was my duty to pass it on. Like the Australian diplomat who spoke to the drunken George Papadopoulos in London and passed his information on to Australia. Australia now, of course, coming under pressure from the United States government to play ball in its fake investigations as well, just like he tried to pressure the government of Ukraine. Very interesting. We'll continue with this after this 2-minute break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, just a little bit of breaking news I'll drop on you, or at least news that is new to me since... Oh, no, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. This isn't even new. What am I talking about? Why did this get circulated again? Okay. This is, in fact, almost exactly a year old, except the tip-off was that it comes from October 2nd. I'm sorry, more than 2 years old. I wonder why. I just saw this fly by on Twitter with somebody making a joke about it, but this is hundreds of White House emails sent to third Kushner family account. And I was saying... boy, that seems like it's been a long time since we first learned that they were improperly handling all their emails. And I thought this was another story of yet another such incident, but it is not. Okay, so drop that one as far as breaking news, though. My news is broken. Where were we? Yes, reading the BuzzFeed News story about Lev Parnas and, is it Igor? Furman/Fruman. And I guess, well, let's just continue with the reading here. I had another point to bring up, but maybe we'll do that at the conclusion of things. So remember where we left off, that Parnas was bragging about how this was going to change everything, and he had information that was going to dominate the debate in the run-up to the 2020 election. It's all going to come out. Something terrible happened, and we're finally going to get to the bottom of it. And it's almost as though he was speaking about the exact opposite of the story he was trying to plant, doesn't it? Almost as if it was all projection. In an exclusive interview with BuzzFeed News, right, he goes on and says, look, information was coming to us. I either bury it or I pass it on. I felt it was my duty to pass it on, which is a good thing, whereas the whistleblower passing it on is apparently a bad thing. He said, and we're still talking to... Parnas here. Parnas said the back channel was initiated by Ukrainian officials who wanted to meet U.S. authorities and had trouble making the right connections. Okay, so just stopping for a second here. You're talking about in July of this year, an interview in which he says, look, Ukrainian officials are having trouble making connections and getting connected with the president. And what we were learning earlier in the story, this is an interesting perspective because, and you have less reason to question it as being backfill now that you know that this comes from not only from July of this year, but from 3 days prior to the now infamous Zelensky phone call, Trump-Zelensky phone call. Why in the world would he cast things this way? It happens to comport exactly with the whistleblower report that the newly elected Ukrainian leadership, the new Ukrainian president, was having difficulty connecting with Trump, which he wanted to do, not because he was pro-Trump, but because he was looking for military help and financial help to fight the Russian invasion and the pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine. And he was willing, like so many world leaders are, to prostrate himself and embarrass himself and flatter Trump and stay in his hotel and do all the stupid things that you have to do for the nationalistic ends of getting the help that your people need to fight for their independence, which back in June of 2016 was of extraordinary concern to House Republicans and now is not, right? So they're having difficulty getting through to Trump. And the reason they're having difficulty getting through to Trump is Trump knows that he has him over a barrel. And he thinks all Ukrainians, we found out on, I forget which show it was, Friday, Monday, maybe the one I had prepared for you for Monday, that Trump has a thing about Ukraine and just views it as hopelessly corrupt and just thinks of Ukrainian people as hopelessly corrupt for some reason. And he was reluctant to get on the phone with them, probably for a number of reasons. Among them are the people whispering in his ear that Ukrainians are the corrupt ones who put Paul Manafort in jail, even though I guess they'd be talking about the more honest Ukrainians who put Paul Manafort in jail, but he doesn't like them. Those people he thinks of as corrupt and treating my friend Paul Manafort very unfairly, even though I hardly knew Paul Manafort. And, you've heard Trump characterize the universally reviled Prosecutor General Shokin as a very fair guy who was being treated unfairly. I mean, he turns all these things upside down, right? So Trump is not speaking with the Ukrainian president because he's trying to formulate a strategy. One, is this person corrupt like all the rest of them? And two, can I put this person over a barrel? I know that they want military aid, and I don't want to give them military aid. Here's where we can make the point that I was thinking about saving for the end. I don't want to give them military aid, and my thinking about it is because that would be anti-Putin. Putin doesn't want them to have military aid. I don't want to upset Putin. We changed the platform with respect to Ukraine during the 2016 election. And by the way, that platform point was about how far the Republican Party endorsed, how far would the Republican Party go in endorsing the idea that we ought to be sending military aid, lethal military aid to Ukraine for the purpose of fighting Russia. And Republicans endorsed that in their platform because Republicans, we're talking about people who are traditionally anti-communist and therefore anti-Russian, even though Russia is no longer communist. But we hadn't adopted the let's convert to a pro-Russia, Russia is our friend platform yet because Trump hadn't put his campaign into effect yet. But that's the part that got changed. It's not just that it had to do with Ukraine. It had to do with endorsing the idea of sending lethal military aid to Ukraine to fight Russia, and they wanted that softened or eliminated, and that's what they went to bat for. So that it stands to reason that in July of 2019, when delivery of the money and the weapons is finally in the offing, Trump is delaying talking to the Ukrainian government because he's trying to concoct a way to break the news to them that he's withholding that and find a way to gain for himself along the way. Or, and here's the point that I was hoping to make, or are we looking at it maybe the wrong way? Or is there a companion piece to this? You have to believe, and I think we still believe that primarily whenever Trump does something, he's doing it for himself. But what if we keep in mind that a lot of what happened in Ukraine and in and around Ukraine, including Russia, happened at Putin's behest because it's good for Putin. And it's not necessarily always a bid to clear Trump's name, but also a bid to clear Putin's name. A lot of this conspiracy theory that it was in fact Ukraine that tampered in the 2016 election is very easily interpreted as not just debunking the theory, the most popular theory underlying the support for impeaching and removing Trump from office, that Russia interfered in his election and he's an illegitimate president to begin with, plus he tried to cover it up, and then tried to do it again with Ukraine and tried to cover that up as well. But it's an exoneration, it ends up being an exoneration of Russia. If Trump can convince everybody that the Mueller report had it all wrong and it wasn't Russia, it was Ukraine, not only does he get to discredit the Mueller report and, in his view, continue in office unmolested, but Putin gets off the hook for the shadow of the interference. It wasn't even them. It was the Ukrainians. Russia's our friend. Ukraine is the enemy, which is, of course, just how Putin would want it, and leaves him subject to the most poignant charge Hillary Clinton made against him, that he would be Putin's puppet. Well, it's happening, so there we have it. All right, continuing on here. There was the interesting note that Parnas said he was establishing a back channel, keynote there, initiated by Ukrainian officials. Whoa, wait a minute. I thought Ukrainian officials at that point were pro, or anti-Trump, or at least, pro-Western, right? So, well, some are and some aren't. Or Parnas is a liar. The back channel was initiated by Ukrainian officials who wanted to meet U.S. authorities and had trouble making the right connections. Or they were, in fact, nominally anti-Trump, pro-Western forces, but they just needed to be able to break through Trump's reluctance to talk to them because of his own corrupt feelings about and aims in Ukraine, and give them the weapons they needed to fight Russia. That they were willing to embarrass themselves and deal with an openly corrupt American regime in order to get the weapons they needed to fight an openly corrupt Russian regime. They thought that might work. So, they knew, these Ukrainian officials who ordinarily wouldn't want anything to do with Trump, asked Parnas and Fruman to help them get connected, to have that phone call. Not thinking at that time, probably, that they were going to be extorted on that phone call. So, they knew I was friends with the mayor, meaning Giuliani, who was previously mayor of New York City. They helpfully note for us here in BuzzFeed News. That was what kickstarted the campaign to dig up information on Democrats in Kiev, an effort that is not going away, Parnas added. We're American citizens. We love our country. We love our president. That's Parnas. So you see what's going on here? It's a complicated and nuanced picture. They're working with Ukrainians who are basically willing to play the game that Trump demands. And remember, we learned last week that it was a known precondition, according to the Ukrainians, that Zelensky was going to have to agree to Trump's extortion just to get on the phone call. How do you think that happened? How did they know that he was going to be extorted? Because I, in fact, just said the opposite. Maybe they didn't know they were going to be extorted. They did know. I'm wrong. I forgot that part. They knew they were going to be extorted because, one, you're talking to Trump, and two, Parnas and Fruman probably told them that's how it's going to go down. Look, we can get the phone call to happen through Giuliani, but in order for that phone call to happen, you're going to have to agree to these demands. That's what this phone call is going to be about. And that is, how they say here, BuzzFeed, in July 22nd, importantly not the 25th yet, that was what kickstarted the campaign to dig up information on Democrats in Kiev. That's why at the beginning of this, at the outset of this, we said it, Brian Beutler said it, so many others of you said it. This has been going on in front of everybody for months, but now we have a whistleblower complaint. Okay, that's what it takes to start the drama. Fruman did not respond to detailed questions sent by BuzzFeed News, nor did Giuliani or the White House. Giuliani had previously said that the two men were his clients and that neither he nor they did anything improper in pushing prosecutors to pursue investigations into Trump's rivals. We remember that very well. But Kenneth McCallion, a former federal prosecutor who once represented Ukraine's former prime minister, Yulia Tymoshenko, remember her, said Parnas and Fruman were, quote, playing with fire by carrying out their campaign in the U.S. and Ukraine without registering as foreign agents or being vetted by the State Department. Remember when that was an important thing and it sort of helped put Paul Manafort in prison? Yeah. Well, that's a minor point compared to what we eventually arrived at, but a good one to remember since it did land somebody in jail here. Trump has either authorized Giuliani to engage in private diplomacy and deal-making, or, even worse, remain silent while Giuliani and his dodgy bands of soldiers of fortune engage in activities that severely undermine U.S. credibility and are contrary to fundamental U.S. interests, he said. Yeah. Fast forward, by the way, to Sebastian Gorka taking off with Pompeo on a U.S. Air Force plane to do the rest of this work. What in the hell is he doing here? What's clear is that for Parnas and Fruman, the stakes were more than just political. While they launched a new energy company to operate in Ukraine, and obviously compete with Burisma, large sums of money, as tend to, congregate around new energy companies, large sums of money were flowing into various bank accounts belonging to the men who are now the focus of legal complaints. We'll get to those next. One transaction in 2018, in that transaction, more than $1 million was wired to a bank account belonging to Parnas from the client trust account of a Florida lawyer specializing in, you'll never guess, real estate and foreign investments. Parnas and Fruman then redirected $325,000 to a Trump-supporting super PAC without declaring the original source of the funds, records and interviews show. So it was foreign, and now it's in an election, and that's a problem. The money is now a target of complaint before the FEC by a nonprofit watchdog group, but don't worry about that because the FEC can't do anything because they're deadlocked. Another story from over the weekend that we still haven't gotten to. The mission, and that is, we'll save that for later. The mission by the two men in Ukraine follows a tumultuous period when, at the height of the U.S. presidential election in 2016, Manafort was forced to resign from Trump's campaign after the leak of a black ledger detailing clandestine payments he had taken from the country's recently toppled pro-Russian regime. Manafort's work for the government of Viktor Yanukovych later became a focus of the special counsel's inquiry into Russia's election meddling, and the former campaign chair was convicted on tax and bank fraud in 2018. Allies of Trump, including Giuliani, have since pushed the theory the ledger might have been faked by officials from the anti-Kremlin government that replaced Yanukovych in a bid to harm Trump and tilt the U.S. election in Clinton's favor. The dispute over the black ledger has placed Ukraine's diplomatic relations with the White House under strain at a time when the country is heavily reliant on U.S. military aid in its ongoing conflict with Russia. Again, please keep in mind that this article is written 3 days before the Zelensky call. The relationship has also been fraught with public clashes between U.S. diplomats and prosecutors in Kiev, over floundering attempts to root out rampant corruption in the country since the toppling of Yanukovych. Not to mention Tymoshenko, toppled by the corrupt pro-Russian forces. Anyway, the president's allies have seized on that tension, touting allegations that Biden intervened during the Obama administration to orchestrate the firing of a prosecutor who was probing corruption claims at a company, though he wasn't, where Biden's son Hunter had earned $3 million as a board member. The problem, of course, with this prosecutor is that he wasn't probing Burisma or anybody else, because he was corrupt and on the take himself. The first public glimpse of Parnas and Fruman's work emerged in May of this year, when Giuliani told the New York Times that Parnas had helped arrange a trip for him to Ukraine, where he hoped to meet with the newly elected president, Volodymyr Zelensky, about matters that could help Trump. In May, we knew. Critics said that amounted to evidence of foreign meddling in U.S. elections, and Giuliani quickly announced that the meeting was off because of how up and up it was. But the full extent to which the two unofficial envoys had inserted themselves into America's diplomacy with Ukraine, a country both at war with and deeply compromised by Russia, has never previously been revealed. And here it was in July, and so what? BuzzFeed News and the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, OCCRP, that's the other article I had here, have examined scores of court filings and confidential financial records and interviewed dozens of people, including Parnas, to piece together the international maneuvers of the two men. The results raise questions about the origins of the money they were spending and whether their work should have been declared, as well as the impact of their efforts on the 2020 election. All right, is there more here? Is this continuing on? It's kind of a weird break with a very large picture that makes it look like it's a different article, but I think it's just a continuation. On a balmy evening in May, Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman hunkered down over a table on the terrace of the gleaming Hilton Tower in Kiev, a hookah pipe burning between them. The gathering was one of their last stops on a tour of 4 countries to meet with Ukrainian authorities and unearth critical information on Trump's potential 2020 challenger Joe Biden, as well as Trump's former opponent Hillary Clinton, before the new president of Ukraine took office. They were on familiar territory. Both men were born in the Soviet Union and had immigrated to the United States, Parnas in 1976 when he was 4, and Fruman as a young adult. Both eventually settled in South Florida. And by the way, I do believe I read elsewhere that they settled in the Sunny Isles Trump Towers down there. Just want to kind of point that out. Both settled in South Florida, where Parnas worked for 3 stock brokerages that were later expelled by regulators. 3. Expelled by regulators for fraud and other violations, like Felix Sater. Though he was never individually charged, unlike Felix, and racked up 9 court judgments for failing to pay loans and other debts. One of his businesses, Fraud Guarantee, which that seems like a terrible name for a company. I guarantee, Fraud Guarantee, we guarantee you'll be defrauded. What? Fraud Guarantee, set up to help people safeguard against fraud, that's the idea, and other financial crimes, was, it says evicted. Yes, I thought it was going to say convicted. Was evicted in 2015 for not paying their office rent, records show. Fruman, 53, continued to make his money in Ukraine, running an export business that ships goods to and from the United States, and a boutique hotel in Odessa, long known as a hub for both tourism and organized crime. One of his investments, a milk canning plant, was declared bankrupt 7 years ago over debts that reached nearly $25 million. But over the past year, their connections in Kiev had suddenly helped propel them to the highest echelons of American society. They had shared a breakfast last year with Donald Trump Jr. and Tommy Hicks Jr., who is currently co-chair of the Republican National Committee, at the Polo Lounge in Beverly Hills as they collectively poured $576,500 into GOP campaigns and dined with the president himself in Washington. They had money for this, even though they were bankrupt and being sued all over the world. Here included is a Facebook screenshot from Lev Parnas' account. Power Breakfast. Hashtag Donald Trump Jr. Hashtag Trump 2020. Hashtag Beverly Hills. There you have it. I don't know who Tommy Hicks... Oh, yes, Tommy Hicks is the co-chair. Right. Okay. Fantastic. In their role as unofficial U.S. envoys, Parnas and Fruman had met at least 4 times with top Ukrainian prosecutors, 2 of whom are steeped in corruption allegations of their own, as they pushed for investigations into Trump's rivals. And they had jetted to Israel to meet with a powerful Ukrainian oligarch accused of stealing billions from one of the country's largest banks. In one of a series of interviews with BuzzFeed News near his home in Boca Raton, Florida, Parnas said the behind-the-scenes efforts started in late 2018 when Fruman received a call from, quote, an acquaintance in Ukraine who wanted to set up a meeting with the country's most controversial prosecutor. Viktor Shokin had been fired 2 years earlier, but now he wanted to unload on the man he held directly responsible for his fall from power, former Vice President Biden. Parnas saw that the information about Biden, who was then eyeing a bid for the presidency, could eventually benefit the Trump campaign. He immediately turned to Giuliani, who had become a friend as Parnas rose to prominence as a GOP supporter. I don't remember if we were having dinner or smoking a cigar, whatever manly activity we were involved in. Whenever we told him at the time, Parnas said, but he viewed Giuliani as a powerful, astute individual, I say astute individual, who would make good use of the information. I knew he would steer it in the right direction, he said. That is the direction of getting Trump impeached. What a dumbass. On a Skype meeting set up by Parnas and his partner, Shokin directly told Giuliani that he had overseen an investigation into a large energy company that was paying up to $50,000 a month to Biden's son Hunter through a consulting firm that he co-founded. Records show the now former vice president had traveled to the country in 2016. You know that part of the story. So it was Shokin calling Giuliani on Skype that got that information to him. Wow. I would just as soon continue reading this for the next hour or so, and it would probably be very illuminating to do so. But I wanted to get to one other article I told you about today's reporting from the Miami Herald. Let me just read as much of that as I can before we close out for the day. He conned us from day one. This reads, Giuliani's Ukraine ally leaves trail of South Florida debts by Nicholas Nehamas and Kevin G. Hall, dated today and updated 22 minutes ago. Now I have some ideas for what I might record for you for tomorrow. But I'll give you a little taste of this and tease it, and you tune in tomorrow. I think I can tape these two things and probably make a show out of it, and I'll read you the conclusion of the BuzzFeed article from July as well. But just a taste. Over the summer, Diane and Mitchell Pues got an ominous phone call. It's P-U-E-S. Ominous phone call from the business partner of a Ukrainian-American entrepreneur who happens to owe the couple more than $500,000 over a movie deal gone bad. He said, the Ukrainians were upset because we were, quote, a dangling participle, unquote. And we needed to make a deal to make them go away. Diane Pues, who lives in New Jersey with her husband, recounted in a recent interview. He said, we no longer knew who we were dealing with, and that the Ukrainians had ties all the way up to the State Department and the White House, and they were partners with Rudy Giuliani. Working with Giuliani, the White House and the State Department was no idle boast. The Ukrainians just happened to be two South Florida businessmen named Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, who have recently become major Republican donors and couriers of what they say is explosive information sourced from Ukraine about widespread corruption involving Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, American diplomats, and Ukrainian officials. The exploits of Parnas and Fruman have caught the admiring eye of President Donald Trump, who also was dumb enough to believe the Federalist, for instance, as well as right-wing pundits and politicians who are amplifying their material. A government whistleblower complaint, one that led House Democrats last week to open an impeachment inquiry into Trump, cited the media reports detailing Parnas and Fruman's work introducing Giuliani to Ukrainian officials, although the two men weren't mentioned by name. But here on the show, of course, they are. All right, we're almost out of time here, but let's read just a little bit more. Experts on Ukrainian politics have largely debunked the accusations against the Bidens and others as conspiracy theories. Even the Ukrainian prosecutor who originally brought attention to the matter has walked back some of his claims. We'll have to take a look at that one, perhaps, for tomorrow's show. The prosecutor, Yuri Lutsenko, was introduced to Giuliani thanks to Fruman and Parnas, according to media accounts and interviews. So they introduced him to Lutsenko and to Shokin himself, On Monday, forgot we need to have our music here. On Monday, 3 House committees subpoenaed Giuliani for the documents relating to his efforts in Ukraine. To Diane and Michael Pues, it's no surprise Parnas has helped inject a stream of apparent misinformation into the public discourse. Mr. Parnas is a con man. He's a crook, Diane Pues said. He conned us from day one. Now, interestingly, her husband declined to be interviewed for this story, and we'll see if we can't figure out exactly why that happens. Although, to be honest, I don't know how common the surname of Pues is, but it rings a bell for me, and I wouldn't be all that surprised given both the South Florida connection of Parnas and Fruman and the New Jersey location for the Pueses, if they were Cuban, and that I had heard their name in connection with my time in Bob Menendez's office way back when, and I'm sort of wondering now whether Michael Pues is a bit of a player in New Jersey Democratic politics or Cuban-American politics, and maybe that's why he didn't want to talk to the press in the middle of all this. We'll find out in the coming days, I am sure. What a cliffhanger. Well, I know what I'm doing for the next couple of hours after I get these links to Scott. Looks like good news. We might get a Wednesday show out of this after all. Stay tuned and keep your eye on the ball.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, stay tuned now for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He's following the globe-trotting travails of Attorney General Barr and others, and where he's going, what he's chasing down. Plus, much, much more, of course, from all around the country and all around the world. You can always count on Justice Putnam to pick up on those stories we may have missed and do it well.